So I wanted to really sort of discuss a bit of an introductory framework for incremental adoption for use of artificial intelligence within parliaments and Congress, as an example. So I've got a couple of slides which really go through, I think, the fundamentals of what are the pillars and what are the sort of foundational methods which we can actually then really look up from a framework perspective. So as a bit of a background, so my name is Jonathan from NovaWorks Australia. We've been working with parliaments and providing advice and consultancy and solutions for the last 17 plus years. And today we're going to go through a bit of a framework which we've developed for adoption of artificial intelligence. And we'll give you a high level overview of what are some of the key pillars and what are the key points that really should be thought about when you're looking at actually adopting artificial intelligence and the use cases around that as well. One of the big things which I sort of really heavily advocate for is really about the use of artificial intelligence is really to supplement the work of Parliament and enhance the services that are delivered to Parliament. I don't see it as a replacement of parliamentary service, and that's a really important fact, that it still has to be controlled and it still actually has to be part of an overall framework. So the use for us is really about to supplement the work of Parliament in the right ways and the right meaningful use cases as well. So when we actually look at the sort of what I call the part one, really, we look at what governance options, and we start off with governance. So governance is really one of the core pillars that we should be looking at when we set up any framework around artificial intelligence. So we're really about aligning with ethical principles, legal requirements, what are the best interests of the institution, its constituencies, and addressing potential issues, concerns as AI implementation progresses. So within here, we have AI ethics and compliance. So really the first step is to develop a bit of an ethics framework that outlines what are the principles governing AI use within the body itself. So we are interested in saying, well, actually, what are the actual ethical principles that we want to apply as a parliament, etc., around any of our AI options? Then we're looking at sort of establishing guidelines for really what is a responsible AI deployment. Does it include transparency? We want fairness, accountability, and also bias mitigation. And I think one of the things when we talk about artificial intelligence is that by default, it includes bias. So what we need to do is make sure that we have a strategy to actually mitigate bias, because bias can be introduced either knowingly or unknowingly when we actually look at data and what data we're actually then feeding into and what algorithms we're actually going to be deploying as well around that. And especially when we're dealing with parliaments, we want to ensure any compliance with either existing regulations, frameworks, standards that may be also applicable either from, say, a federal institution or a more like, say, even the European Union have gone through, and they're actually looking at introducing a standardized policy as well. So we need to make sure that we're considering what the data protection, privacy policies, but also even internally, what your sort of standing orders or your own internal ethics are actually then working through as well. Look at establishing a AI oversight committee. And we usually have an oversight committee in place, and really their job is to comprise of your key stakeholders. So that might be members of Parliament, it might be members of IT, members of archive, legal experts, AI specialists, to really about reviewing and approving those AI types of projects as well. And it's really about providing governance, it's providing risk assessment and ethical guidance throughout the life cycle of the AI adoption. And we then want to then look at transparency and accountability as well. So implementation of mechanisms for transparency in what decision making. clear documentation of what sort of AI software or cloud services, data sources, models, what outcomes are we actually looking at achieving, and whatever roles and responsibilities as well. So when we then have that, we actually have a very clear understanding from ethics to oversight to what the transparency and accountability is before we actually then get to what we call the technology options as well. So when we then look at what our next sort of pillars start to come into, we're looking at sort of data governance, access control, really about how do we then want to use that data? How do we want to manage data access, sharing, security around that? And because we are dealing with potentially sensitive content as well, we want to make sure that that data is protected. What encryption measures are there, and also what data sovereignty rights are we actually going to be interested in too? Stakeholder engagement is really critical as one of the fundamental pillars. So we want to engage with stakeholders. That could include constituencies. It could include academia or academic research. It could include other organizations, privacy advocates, to gather input and feedback around what types of AI initiatives you're actually going to be looking at deploying. And you want to then obviously make sure that we can foster the transparency and public trust by involving external experts or internal experts and conducting regular consultations on AI projects as well. And transparency and public trust is really important. So if you looked at the previous example and what Ludwig was actually showing, he was actually showing how he was sort of using and publicly displaying their use of artificial intelligence, to the public citizens. So you need to make sure that, that we do have a level of trust and transparency from when the public is actually then consuming that. So as researchers would say, they like to see the source information, and they can do their own models as an example. By using AI, we're sort of putting the trust and the transparency in those sort of AI processes and the models. Regular audits and impact assessments and adaptive policies and regulations is another pillar as well. So auditing once you've actually got the AI system in place, looking at the fairness for compliance with the ethical guidelines, develop and evaluate the social, political and economic implications of AI adoption as well. So you don't want to introduce bias. So if you introduce a certain AI technology or an algorithm, are you introducing like a political bias as well? So making sure that we can actually assess that and have a mechanism to actually do that as well. Keeping up obviously with existing legislative frameworks, up to date with the advancements in AI technology. AI is on a very large learning curve, or a large adoption curve, as we like to sort of say. So it is adapting and evolving very quickly, and it will evolve over, the next sort of 2 years in a very quick succession, a very quick pace. So we want to make sure that we keep up to date with those sort of technologies and those sort of concerns. And obviously then adapting to those sort of policies and regulations. I've got a couple of sort of what I call general points that I'd like to sort of cover as part of this framework. A lot of systems, you might have in place already. So make sure we consider, as an example, how do we actually look at that incremental adoption of AI in Parliament and Congress? There's a few additional points which we should probably keep in mind. So can we actually align an AI system that we might be looking at procuring or developing? And how can we actually make sure that that's going to integrate with the existing systems and solutions? We want to make sure that we still have compatibility with those legacy solutions, because we don't want to disrupt the normal business operations and just replace everything all at once. So, and that's how we can then build it up over that period of time, where we can gradually introduce those sort of technologies in a meaningful manner as well. Obviously, we need to have budget, resource allocation, and effectively a good, we don't want to overspend as well. Like what we're talking about here can be done, potentially on a shoestring budget. It doesn't have to have significant investment if we do it in the right manner, if we've got the right governance actually set up. There is a change management and cultural shift aspect, which we need to probably discuss as well. AI adoption might require some sort of level of cultural shift within the organization. We've spoken with other parliaments in the past where we've talked to them about artificial intelligence, and they go, we don't need it. We don't have any need for it because they might think that their job is going to be replaced by something, whereas we can use it as a tool in the toolkit to actually make sure that they're actually doing high value tasks, not low value tasks. So there will always be a level of resistance when we actually then look at how we look at those sort of change management aspects around adoption of artificial intelligence. Cybersecurity, data protection is another important aspect. We want to make sure that we do have those sort of robust cybersecurity measures to protect those sort of data from potential threats and breaches. So AI is just an extension of your normal cybersecurity concerns. And we need to make sure that we understand what those sort of concerns actually be introduced and how to then proactively and meaningfully deal with those sort of issues as well. We want to know if we're giving, say, for example, if we want to give all of our information to ChatGPT, we really need to understand what it's doing with it, how it's going to be using it, where it's storing that information, and whether it's within your own risk assessment that that's actually going to be acceptable, as an example. So there's a lot of considerations when you actually look at, well, what do you want AI to do with your data, and how do you want it to be proactively used? International collaboration, that's why we're all on this call as well, on this particular conference this week. It is really, really important to explore what opportunities are actually available out there, leverage other people's experience, and really drive that sort of collaborative effort around streamlining that learning process. You know, there's a lot of learning out there, a lot of learning by other parliaments who've already invested in these processes. So, you know, learn from it so you can actually get a jump start on your own artificial intelligence journey as well. And as you sort of saw from the Ludwig's presentation as well, feedback mechanisms actually become really important. So you want to have a way of gathering the feedback around, is this actually working? Is it actually really driving the right results in terms of what you're actually expecting as well? So gathering feedback, gathering usage patterns, gathering how people actually are using those systems become important when you're actually planning out those sort of projects as well. And my final sort of slide is really about then scalability, long-term planning, you know, planning for future growth. Like, things are going to change. Things are actually going to be adopted, you know, across a period of time. And what is it actually going to actually evolve like long-term? And what does that roadmap for continuous improvement actually look like? Public communication, education, you know, it might be worthwhile educating the public about what you're actually doing with artificial intelligence, how you're actually using it, because that really is about understanding how they perceive artificial intelligence, how you can then use that, and then really provide that feedback, you know, into your own internal processes as well. I'm all about risk management. We've got contingency planning, monitoring and evaluation as well. And it becomes really important to identify what the potential risks are, what contingency you have in place, and address any unexpected bias or challenge that may be introduced when you're actually looking at an AI system. Risk mitigation for maintaining continuity and trust, because I think that's one of the key things is if you're looking at deploying an AI system and then suddenly people have been using it and then you issue an upgrade and all the results completely change. You know, that's not necessarily going to be harnessing or developing a trust with those consumers with actually using your system as well. So it's understanding what impacts of those changes are going to be, how we can actually develop a risk mitigation plan, and then managing it from there. And really then I think the last sort of thing which I wanted to cover was really about you know, regularly assessing those metrics. So defining what metrics you actually then want to look at from the use of artificial intelligence. And, you know, artificial intelligence doesn't have to be applied to absolutely every part of your business. You know, choose what use cases, as sort of, again, I'll come back to Ludwig's presentation, which was great. You know, what he sort of said when you look at his implementation of AI, is make sure you're choosing the right use case for the data set that you're actually using in their system, because you may get results that you're not expecting. So when you look at the success of AI adoption, you should be looking at what metrics. Are people using them the wrong way or an unintended way that you haven't predicted? So, you know, having what those sort of metrics actually look like become really, really important. So, yeah, that's pretty much the end.